we did a blimp space a few weeks ago, and like one of the blimp gals, her skill at these sound effects, it was like really amazing.
Oh.
You know, so she really had like a, you know, kind of like a touch, a timing, if you will. She has the magic
touch.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. She'd be like, "What do you think?" And then you're just like, it's like it doesn't even make any sense, but it's just like you need someone else to do it. I think
I've been in trouble for doing it in the past. I think because the judgment was that I was too mean with the effects.
Who said that? Who said that?
Oh, well, someone lame. It's just, you know, like your comment, anything you have to say, I just toilet, basically.
Well, because it's like ribbing. You know what I mean? It's like if you can't take the toilet sound, it's like get out.
Get out of the space.
Get out of the kitchen. Migrev,
welcome.
You unmuted? You're here. You're ready to go.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
And how?
Welcome, Migrev. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, just by way of a little introduction,
do it.
I'll just say a word or two, which is Migrev is working on Red Horizon, also an app called Hawk, which I think you'll probably tell us about. You're a developer. I'm sure most people know you, but if you want to say more about yourself, or Anthony, if you want to say more.
I want to say, first of all, that Migrev is a resident of the Midwest.
Oh,
so
yeah.
He's here in solidarity with the rest of us.
That's right. I stand with the middle people.
You just say everyone's talking shit on, what's that chick's name? The singer.
Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift. You know, I don't know. The internet's like, is it an op? Is her and Travis Kelce an op? Migrev and I are here with the people on the ground doing some on-ground reporting on Taylorgate, which everyone appears
What's
to have
the
forgotten
verdict?
about.
Do you guys have some
Migrev, what's your theory on is Taylor and Travis an op or not?
I think word on the street is that Taylor's cool again. That's the last I heard.
That's what I've been hearing too, but maybe we're just getting like I don't know, maybe we've been opped. It's hard to say who's closer.
It is really hard to say.
Well, what I know is that they are apparently cohabitating in superb, rich Midwesterner fashion, which means like having a literal 9,000 square foot house that is probably just blasting the AC constantly in like a Missouri suburb. And just but I do know people that live, I guess they probably live in Kansas actually, but that live near them, and apparently it's very, it's very real.
They have a mega deck.
They have a mega deck. I mean, you haven't really seen gaudy until you've seen an extremely wealthy Kansas City suburb castle / plane hangar / driving range.
Yeah, a few years ago, not this last New Year's Eve, but the New Year's Eve before that, I went to some weird late night Kansas City party at Travis Kelce's neighbor's house. Okay. And Travis Kelce came over and he kind of crashed the party, and he was really popular at the time. He's like, everyone come over to my house, I'll give you all a tour. And it was before the whole Taylor Swift thing, but yeah, he's got a really nice house, and seems like a nice guy.
I mean,
he's an operative.
He did a MTV Cribs style.
I was just an icebreaker that just makes my blood turn cold is come over, I'll give you a tour.
It seemed like he was doing his neighbor a favor. He's I'm friends with Travis Kelce. Don't worry about it.
But I feel also he probably, there's this certain kind of I don't want to say dumb. When I use the word dumb, I use it. It's a positive thing. It's I'm saying that in a positive way. I just imagine his house has a room devoted to pinball machines or something. It's just this is my collection of vintage pinball machines, and it's bigger than my house. And you're that's what people should be doing with their money, in my opinion.
It was surprisingly underwhelming.
Was it?
There wasn't anything that was super unique. It was just a nice person's house.
Yeah. I went to Notch's house one time, the Minecraft guy, for a party, because I'm a very important person. And his house, it looked most of these people's houses look like no one lives there.
They're staged.
Yeah, it's staged. And I just remember Notch's house had many more bathrooms than there were rooms. It was there was 5 bedrooms and 25 bathrooms. And they all had those Toto toilets that open automatically. You know, have you seen this? Motion controlled toilets. Talk about Internet of Things here. And so you'd like be super drunk, and you'd in this very loud Halloween party, and then you walk into this bathroom, and just like the toilet like opens to meet you.
Yeah, it greets you as you enter.
And see, on Urbit, that would be your toilet, though.
Your forever toilet.
Your forever toilet. Exactly. All right. Well, Migrev, that we've established that you're from the Kansas City metro area. You want to give us a little bit more of an introduction into yourself and kind of like how you got into Urbit and how you joined us on this spectacular journey?
Yeah, we've been doing origin stories, so go back as far as you want.
Yeah.
All right, origin stories. I think I heard about Urbit initially through a monastery that I was living at. I got really into Emacs when I was in college and met some monk guy who was also really into Emacs. He made YouTube videos about him. During COVID, it was kind of a weird time of my life. I ended up quitting my job and moving to the monastic academy that Joshin lives at now.
Oh, okay. All right.
And has been associated with for a while. And then, through that community of people, I just kind of heard about Urbit, found out, and then seemed interesting. And after I left the monastery, I was living in my car, traveling down the east coast of the US, just kind of living in random national parks and hanging out, basically. I got bored and started reading the Urbit docs. I kind of instantly fell in love with the idea. I really wanted to be in control of all my own data. You know, people always talk about this kind of thing, but I wanted to do it in a way that wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna set up a Linux server and put, I don't know, the name like Nextcloud on it or something. That was kind of what my initial impression of what personal servers were. But it was kind of an instant click when I found out about Urbit. So started learning it. Took me quite a while to actually dive in to start learning Hoon and everything, but I managed to shitpost enough on Twitter about Urbit and got decently proficient at running my ship and was running running ships for a few of my friends as well. And started shitposting about that. And then Tiller Tollbus reached out to me and said I should apply for one of the jobs at Chorus One. And ended up working there and getting better at Hoon. And since then, I've just been diving as deeply as I can, trying to make sense of it all.
So this story has it all. This is an amazing. We gotta like go through this entire thing. So first of all, I want to just provide a little background lore for everyone. So Joshin, who Migrev mentioned, is a Buddhist monastic who was, I believe, employee one at Twan. Very close. Like he's one of the
I think number one.
Is that right? So he's been working on Urbit for a long, long time. He, I think, has gone back and is now like doing some sort of multi-year retreat and is cut off from society. But he is as OG Urbit as it gets, and he's part of this community up. What is it in Vermont, Migrev?
Yeah, up in the mountains of Vermont.
Yeah, called I believe Maple. Is that what it's called now?
The acronym is Maple, the Monastic Academy for Preservation of Life on Earth.
There we go. So I encourage everyone to look that up. Maybe someone can drop this in the replies. But yeah, so it's kind of interesting. When you mention Buddhist monastery and Emacs in the first sentence, I feel like you're probably just Urbit things. You know what I mean? So why do you think it is that Urbit resonates with this kind of person being you and Joshin?
I don't know exactly what it is. It's hard to draw an exact through line, but a lot of the people who were at the monastic academy, smart people, a little bit on the fringe of society in terms of what they're willing to believe in. So I guess the common through line is just a openness to weird ideas or ideas that would seem weird to, the average Midwesterner, I guess.
Yeah, just sort of a general contrarian.
Yeah, I always joke that the through line for me is that both Emacs and Urbit were created by weird, quirky white guys with bad political takes.
You know what the Voight Comp test is in Blade Runner?
No.
It's the test where at the beginning of the original movie, it's the test they administer to see if you're a replicant. And so it's sort of like
scans your eyes, right?
scans your eyes, and they
Yeah.
do ask this famous question where it's like you come across a turtle that's turned up on its shell in the middle of the desert. Like, what do you do with the turtle? And then they monitor their response. I think the implied thing is the replicant reacts differently than it hermit. But I feel like there's like a certain similar thing with like, would you like Urbit? It's like, when did you start using kettlebells? Have you ever practiced any kind of Buddhism? Do you like Emacs? There's like lots of different things that would go on that. So Emacs is a common obsession, I think. What do you think the connection is there? Because I hear that a lot as well.
Well, it's a unified system, and it has this similar ethos of like, oh, I want to put all of my data in this, and because I put it there, I understand the relationality between all of my own pieces of data, and the environment is inviting me into, a way of being with it where I can really control it, because everything in Emacs is like pushing you to write your own eLisp. It's actually very similar to Shrubbery in a lot of ways. Like, you have this file system and you put like these special files at these different places in your file system to give your subdirectories special powers in the Emacs world. So you can put a special file at the root of your code directory, and then anytime you open a file that's inside of that directory, even if it's nested very deeply, Emacs knows about that special file there, so it will give your interface some special quality. And you can build these, really amazing development workflows inside of it. And one of the more interesting parts about Emacs to me is that it's a very old program. Like, it's one of the oldest programs that people still use widely, and
does it predate,
still has people.
VI? I don't really know the relative.
I think it does, yeah.
So for those of you that don't know, these are basically the two, for a long time, were the two kind of incumbent text editors most used for programming on Unix operating systems. And now people have gotten all kinds of wacky other shit. But for a long time, it was like VI and Vim, which is just another version of VI, versus Emacs. So it's one of those things where it's kind of like, I feel like when you start programming, you kind of like pick a team almost arbitrarily, or we did at one time, and they just stick with that. But Emacs is famous for being, it's like an operating system masquerading as a text editor type thing.
Yeah, the only thing that Emacs lacks is a good text editor, but it's supposedly a very good operating system. Yeah, I got into VI and Vim actually before Emacs, but pretty quickly realized that once I learned a little bit of Lisp, I'm like, oh, wow, yeah, I'm going to be super pretentious about this for the rest of my life. So
there's like, I bet there's these memes where it's like when a guy's in high school, he like picks one of these things and like makes his whole personality about it. I feel like that's definitely true for text editors, or was true for people a little bit older. I feel like now kids are just like VS Code is all they want to talk about, but like back in the day, it was like you're either a VI person or an Emacs person, and it was kind of just like your whole identity formed around that. So just to be, and you kind of like glossed over a little bit, like, had you programmed already before Urbit, or was this like your first programming thing? I didn't catch that part of your background.
Yeah, I went to school for computer science. I ended up getting kicked out of college, but
nice.
Did computer science there, worked for one of my professors for a while doing front-end development, and then Urbit was right after that.
So I was going to ask, because like now I would say you predominantly focus on UI stuff, it seems like to me, right? And so that's kind of always been your gig, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm much better at browser development than like systems engineering, I would say.
Very nice, which is a rarity actually in the Urbit sphere, because a lot of people don't.
You guys are way too smart to be doing browser stuff.
Yeah, but it's like, do you want to be smart or do you want to make money is the question, right? Okay, so that's good. I feel like I'm pretty caught up. Raza, do you have any questions about this man's, if you want to delve into his sordid past at all?
Well, I mean, I always have questions about people that choose like to follow the monastic pathway. I mean, not that there's just one, but maybe I'll bother him about it later.
Okay, take it offline. It's for the B-roll.
Sounds good.
This is for later.
For the subscribers only
Patreon
content. Exactly. Yeah. So in the behind the scenes content, we'll do the story of you getting kicked out of school, and we'll do the monastic thing, and then everyone will So people have something to look forward to. I mentioned probably unfairly when I tweeted about this that we were going to discuss Shrubbery. So unfortunately, you're on the hook for delving into that a little bit. But I was wondering if you could I'd like to cover both Hawk and Shrubbery and the relationship between them. And you can kind of take that in whatever order you think is most appropriate.
So initially, they didn't have anything to do with each other. I had this idea of like making an Emacs on top of Urbit, where, it's the system that you put all your data into and it's organized like a tree. And I was super excited about that for the primary reason of I wanted to be able to code from my phone. I don't know why that feature specifically really engrossed me.
It might be the living in your car for some period.
Yeah, that might have been it. And there was this weird time where I was living in DC doing some internship, and on the bus into work, I would pull up Termux on my little Android phone, and I would try to make these little browser games using Vim inside of Termux on my phone. So I've always just been into this idea of like the interface to my computer should not be the thing that's limiting me. There should be this computer that is defined in like a really abstract way. And then the interface that I'm using to interact with it shouldn't be co-located with the computer itself. I should be able to log into my computer from any device, basically.
Yeah, it's funny because that's a very urban thing, but it's also kind of a very like shell. I do that exact same thing all the time, like shell into my home computer from my phone, So it's kind of like one of these new old ways of thinking. So that's really cool. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, so I made a prototype of like a little text editor and worked on that last year towards the end of it. And yeah, that became a project called IS, which is the word for a baby hawk. And I, since publishing that, have been slowly trying to build this out more. And I was originally planning on just making it more of like a file editor. But once Liam started publishing the documentation around what he had with Neo, there was just too much overlap to ignore it and try to go my own way. So I made this little Twitter video trying to bait him into teaching me how to implement Shrubbery into my app, and it kind of worked. So now we're working together with the Aegean team, and Hawk has turned into, I guess, our experiments to render Shrubbery. And what Shrubbery is, the closest analogy is a file system, but it's a bit different than that. It's like a file system where instead of your apps just being plain text, they can be applications and they can send pokes to other places in your file tree. And it's very tied in with this idea of Scry namespace maximalism, where you're putting as much of the data that you care about in the Scry namespace, which gives it this very clean hierarchical structure. And what Hawk is it's just a way to view the data in that tree in hopefully a really mobile-friendly way.
Yeah. Okay. So this is good. So why don't we go back and kind of unpack some of those things? And that's a really good overview. So first thing I was going to say is like you showed me a Hawk demo that kind of didn't make any Shrubbery assumptions, right? So can you kind of like explain what kind of pre-Shrubbery Hawk was like? Because it was really impressive. And then kind of like no Shrubbery required. And so it might be good to kind of explain to people what that was like and then move on to the Shrubbery component. Yeah,
I was taking a lot of inspiration from spreadsheets in that prototype. It still is fundamentally just a tree, but I came up with this nice little UI system that lets you fold parts of the tree, which was the main thing that I was trying to design against, because everyone agrees that trees are the natural interface to basically any non-trivial data structure that humans care about. And I was actually reading a Philip Monk blog post from a few years ago where he's talking about this exact problem of you need a generalized tree editor and viewer. And so my solution to the problem of like, okay, these trees become very large and unwieldy, and you need ways to print them, but every tree is shaped a little bit different. So you don't want to like over specialize on a certain kind of tree. And there you have this trade-off between, it needs to be general enough to print out any tree, but it needs to be specific enough for the cases that you can't just like print out a giant noun that means nothing. It's kind of a pretty printer problem.
Yeah, it's a pretty big problem.
So yeah, I came up with this little UI system that lets you fold these nodes up and down, so that at least you can, as an author of a tree, set the order of the children and set some default folding toggles. And yeah, that worked pretty well. And it got a lot of good feedback because I added the ability to stick images and music files in there.
I mean, so probably to paint a picture for everyone, right? It's like imagine bulleted list of arbitrary depth, right? I believe. And every bullet in the bulleted list can be, I mean, just to oversimplify, it can be text, it could be another tree, it could be another bulleted list, it could be a complex type, it can be code, or it can be an image or a audio file. And these can all be folded and rearranged, right?
Yeah.
Is that kind of correct? And you also did, there was some reactive programming element to this as well, correct? Or that was the idea?
No, I actually got it working,
did you?
which was pretty cool. Yeah, it was kind of like Excel, but instead of being shaped like a grid, it's shaped like a tree. So you can reference cells that are inside of you and build up these complex trees of computation where the higher levels rely on the lower levels, and it aggregates up the tree into whatever program you're making.
Yes, I mean, so for those of you that are not Excel cells, the paradigm that Excel uses, and a lot of people, they refer to it as functional reactive programming. So what that means is that every Excel cell is a function of other cells. And if you change the input to your cell, that cell will automatically update, right? So there's no compilation, as it were, with an Excel spreadsheet for the most part. I think there's like weird shit you could do to make it do that, but everything updates in real time. So everything is current is the best way to think about it. And so one of the things that migrev did in the Hawk tree editor was to take that paradigm and kind of extend it to a general tree, which I think is very cool, kind of unprecedented actually. So one thing I was going to say though is like when we talked about that, there was still like the open question of maybe the ability to put UI elements in the tree, correct?
Yeah, like how would you embed a full application at one of these nodes that needs to have the user input into it, basically, not just static data, have a full application lifecycle at one of these places in the tree. And I did not have a good answer to that. It was in the back of my mind, kind of this optimistic goal, like, oh yeah, maybe I'll do something with iframes. And it turns out that this idea called Shrubbery, which Urbit has been, moving towards and mythologizing about for a long time now, it actually was the same idea.
Beautiful. Okay, so now's the time to kind of like, with that in the background, then how did you bring Shrubbery into this UI system,
So there's this weird marriage that we're attempting right now between Shrubbery, this rendering system, and the glue that we're using to marry them is this kind of obscure JavaScript library called HTMX, which allows you to swap interfaces with other interfaces that potentially live on a server somewhere else.
Yeah, so, you hit me to this. Why don't you just explain to people what that is a little bit more? Because I think it's really, I don't think people understand how cool this is. And it's an existing JavaScript library. So why don't you explain a little bit more about how it works?
It really is a very impressive piece of software. I am continually impressed with it every time I dive deeper into how it was made. But it's a way of creating applications that include these rich front ends, where instead of doing all of the complicated interface manipulation on the front end in JavaScript using React, like how you would usually make something in a traditional SaaS application, what you do is you server render everything. So your Urbit creates the interfaces and sends them to your web browser in these little chunks that kind of get swapped in and out of the page dynamically based on the user clicking around. So if I click a button to open up a new page, instead of doing a full page reload, like is the default in your web browser with HTML, it will just get a little piece of an interface from your Urbit and then swap it into your browser at the correct location. And it has all these nice properties that simplify application development in these really, really nice ways so that you can define your interface very declaratively without needing to understand the super low level mechanics of how things actually swap in and out of the browser on a technical level. You just kind of define, okay, I need to get this resource at this location and put it here on the interface. And then it just kind of figures everything out. And it's only, I think, a few thousand lines of code. It's super small.
That's really cool. I mean, and so it's kind of interesting, right? Because in the very early days of front-end development, you would render a lot of the UI on the server side. In the most simple case, you just send a big glob of HTML to the browser, right? And then it got more and more complicated, Django type stuff. And then it kind of went through this period of React where it's really just all JavaScript and there's very little HTML at all. And now we're kind of going back to a thing where the server does the rendering of the UI, but in these small bits. Like it'll just render a button. It'll just render a form. It won't re-render the entire window, which I think is it just seems like it's very Urbit-y. It's just very well suited to having your own server.
Ted had a tweet recently that I just saw today about what Shrubbery actually is. It's a server-side component system. And yeah. HTMX is like the direct translation of that, where you take those server-side components, render them as HTML, and then that's it. That's your whole application model.
That's really, really interesting. And it kind of argues for UI in a Shrubbery type system being very localized to specific data structures, if that makes sense. Meaning like imagine you have a chat app. I'm going to say something and you just tell me if I'm wrong, obviously. You have a chat app and in that chat app, you have different little UI elements, right? You have a message, you have a button to send it, you have a form, all that stuff. Well, that in a sort of Shrubbery type thinking might be decomposed. And so the way that you render that message can live alongside the message itself, which means that it can be re-rendered somewhere else. So they're not all globbed together. Am I thinking about this correctly, or am I?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And the connection between those two things is the fundamental data structure behind what a web page is shaped like a tree. It's called the DOM tree. And your shrub tree is also shaped like a tree. So now that we have a backend that is fundamentally the same shape as what the front end needs to be, we can do these really trivial conversions between the data types. And you're kind of just mirroring the shape of the tree on the front end and adding a little bit of structure so that it makes sense that things are showing up in the right spot. But you're not defining an entire interface from top to bottom in one piece like you would usually. You're kind of just defining parts of the tree that all fit together. You can mix and match them much more easily.
Interesting. I've been sort of trying to get better at explaining Shrubbery to people. Can I try one on you guys, and you can tell me if it's right or if it makes sense?
So, yeah, I'll tell you.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, Will, you just be the judge, okay, for a second. Let me try to do this on Roslet. Actually, Will, do you have access to the audio effects?
I don't know how I would know if I did, so probably not. Probably not.
I was going to say you could do like a little buzzer. If I say something incorrect, factually incorrect, you could like buzz me.
Okay.
So Roslet, this is the real question. Have you ever interacted with the file system? I guess that's probably the best way to think about it. I think a lot of younger people haven't.
Not really, no.
But you're familiar with, like, you go on your desktop on your computer and you click into something that looks like a file, and then it has either more files in it or files themselves.
Yes, I'm familiar with
more folders. Yeah. Okay, so this is your file system, right? It's a graphic representation of your file system. You could do that on the command line as well, meaning, you just go to like CD, change directory into home, and then ls, and that'll list all of my various documents, and I can CD, whatever. And so that kind of hierarchical tree structure is exactly what he's talking about. You have this tree structure, and the files are contained in that tree structure. Well, the thing is, in that tree, the leaves of that tree are files, are PDFs, are docs, are images, are music files, so forth. But in a system like Shrubbery, the nodes of that tree can be either data or code. So instead of just having kind of like this closed set of file formats that are supported, you just think it's just generalized code and data. And that code and data can be just a string, right? One of them might just be like a string that says hello. Or it can be a piece of code similar to an application that will transform another piece of data. Does that make sense? So there would be no distinction, like at least on Mac, there's a folder that says applications. You know, those things in that file operate on data, let's say, right? And then you have your desktop, which is just lists of different files. So you kind of have this idea where they're treated differently. But in something like Shrubbery, there would be no distinction. And these would all be within the same model. And application development then doesn't look like what we think of now of creating a Gall app that does this, takes that. It would be just doing manipulations on that tree. So if I had a piece of data that said hello and another piece of code at a different location that was, that just added world to the end of any string, I compose those together and now I have a string that says hello world. Does that make sense, Roslet?
Yeah, I'm visualizing something. I don't know if it's what you're visualizing, but yeah.
All visuals are valid here. The real question is it correct? migrev, is that correct?
I think it makes sense. Yeah, it's so hard to describe with words, but luckily it is a very visual thing because you have this tree, and the way even that you program it feels much more spatial than other kinds of programming.
Interesting. Explain that.
Yeah, like you're thinking a lot more about the relationship of a certain piece of data to its parent in the tree or its children, instead of like needing to find something in crazy complicated data structure. It's more like, okay, it's going to be in my kids somewhere. So I just loop through my kids and display them. Even the way you would build a more complex application, it's not you're building one giant piece of machinery. You're building a tree of machinery where a lot of the state gets pushed down farther and farther into the kids, into these smaller, more modular and composable pieces.
I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, I feel like, and maybe the difference won't be as apparent to people that haven't written Gall apps, but this sounds like quite a different experience than writing. A Gall, by the way, for listeners at home, is the basic application model that is used now. That Shrubbery would potentially either replace or live alongside. It sounds quite different from developing on the application in a Gall app, right?
Yeah, you still have to know like what a card is and the concept of a poke and everything, but it's different, yeah.
I mean, do you think there's a world where we could get rid of all that stuff, and just like be totally free of the Gall model, or is there certain things that you need for that to stay?
Well, I mean, Gall will be around for a long time, but there will be programming environments inside of Shrub where you've limited the scope of what a Shrub can be down to just a few basic components, and it gives you this very rigid environment where it literally is like playing with Legos because all of the pieces are restricted such that they have to fit with these other pieces. And then you can do something like a true programmable interface where you don't even have to switch context at all to get a full iteration loop between the code and the interface. But Shrub is a lot grander than the UI experiments that I was initially playing around with Hawk. Like Shrub is pretty vast, and you can do more complicated stuff with Shrub that is a little bit lower level than the interface stuff that we're talking about here. Like there's ideas about using this stuff for blockchain and AI that still is fundamentally about shaping your data as a tree, but it doesn't necessarily require you to be in this interface-focused development environment.
Yeah, I mean, not everything is visualizable or worth visualizing, right? I mean,
yeah,
the output of it may be, but maybe not the actual computations themselves, right? One of the things that you kind of alluded to was the single environment for the development of the front end and the back end, or what we used to call the front end and the back end. Can you explain kind of how that's done now? I mean, on Urbit, it's kind of done, unfortunately, very similar to how most people do it, right? And like what that would be like in the sort of Hawk Shrub future?
Yeah, so in the Shrub model, when you create an application, really what you're defining is something we call an implementation, which is like this node in the tree needs to have a state that is this specific shape. Its kids are going to be this specific shape. It can take messages that are this specific shape, and it can have some dependencies that are this specific shape. So you have this file that defines the shape of the node at that place in the tree. And then you have these other files that define the conversions between that node and whatever renderer you're using. And that's all you need to create an application. It's 2 or 3 files for something that is like a note-taking app.
But what's interesting, right, is the way that these kinds of development works now. It sounds like it still, at some level, still works like this for your model. Is you have a text editor that you open up and you type a whole bunch of gobbledygook into it, and you hope it produces the right data. And then in a separate window, you define, it shows you what the UI will look like, right? And you kind of have to context switch between those two things, between the sort of magic words of the programming language and then like the boxes on the screen of the UI itself. So do you think there's like a way that we could bring those together? I mean, I just think that, something like Excel doesn't have that distinction, right? There's no two modes for Excel. So it's like, could we move in that direction? Is that kind of what you're alluding to?
Yeah, this idea of a programmable interface is super compelling to me. Like every data type provides its own interface. So if you're viewing an image, you don't need to go back to the source code of that application to change the image. The image renderer has a button on it for you to change the image. So you're programming your application just by clicking buttons in the interface or by doing key commands in your interface, just like Excel. But because of the affordances of the underlying model being shaped like a tree, it's much more amenable to like applications that need to have rich interfaces and not an Excel spreadsheet.
I mean, that's the thing about the Excel comparison, which of course I'm guilty of making a lot, right? Is that the Excel paradigm is more than just the grid, basically, because that is limited in its way and people have to do a lot of weird stuff to get around it, right? But there are things about it that I think are really worthwhile. I mean, this is a stat I shared with you, maybe I shared with other people. It's like, I'm pretty sure last time I checked, there are 1.6 billion users of spreadsheet programs on Earth, which is just an absolutely staggering number. And there's something like 26 million programmers, like maybe, on entire planet Earth. That's a pretty big difference, right? And so clearly there is some desire and demand for what you're referring to as what programmable interface thing, right? Because that's really what is nice about Excel is it's the same interface for someone who's just making a shopping list and someone who's making a very elaborate macro-filled trading simulation. And that's really, really beneficial. If we could do that and do it within the Urbit kind of tree paradigm, and we have all these other benefits that Excel doesn't have, it's like then Urbit Excel killer becomes real and then profit.
It's going to be so real. Like, you guys have no idea. You guys have no clue. It's insane. It's actually insane.
Very few people have accused me of not thinking big enough. So I think
you're nowhere close to bullish enough, Anthony. I'm telling you.
However bullish I am, I'm not bullish enough. Okay, that's good. That's good. I love to hear that because I'm extremely bullish. Anybody else in the audience? I'd be interested to know if you have questions for Migrev here. Covered a lot of stuff. Here we go. V8PAFNS.
No need to read the whole thing.
Listener, what is your question for our man?
Yeah, just making sure I was getting that last point there. So I'm imagining taking Excel with instead of like E9 colon, B4 or whatever, for some grid addressing scheme, replacing it with some sort of tree addressing scheme in addition to a tree-based renderer. So, something that allows you to drill down or up through a structure. Whereas Excel might usually be a grid, but you can obviously make some pretty complicated interfaces out of it. Is the idea that the Shrubbery render would be something similar, but with the tree renderer and tree addressing that you can still apply code to and that you can still style in really interesting ways, and that becomes your interface? Or is it something else where you're kind of still writing custom interfaces for it? Hey, maybe you could do that for Excel. For all I know, I don't use it.
Oh, you could do crazy. You could do a lot of twisted things with Excel. But it depends on how many menus you want to dive through. But Migrev, why don't you answer that?
So you get the best of both worlds. You can write a custom renderer for an implementation if you have a super custom implementation, like, I don't know, you make a really interesting workout tracker and you want to have a nifty UI with lots of CSS in it that displays your workouts in a really nice way. But you're exactly right. You use a tree addressing mechanism to pull in your data dependencies. Luckily, the way you address data in trees, it's just a path. You just have a file path, basically.
Yeah, just arbitrary depth you've got now, in addition to, instead of just the grid.
Yep. And you pull in that data as an Urbit noun with the data type of it basically being an Urbit mark. And you can do any computation on it that you want, including build a custom renderer.
So one thing I think is that you alluded to is really interesting. I think an unsung thing about Excel, right, is that the variable's location is its variable name, right? E9 is the variable name, which is just a nice convenience. Like, no one has to sit around and think about what the variable name is going to be, which is, I think it's like, as they say, naming is one of the hard problems. So it's sort of like doing away with that is really useful. And so, but we could do that with basically a scribe path. Is that correct, migrev? Like you just have a tree addressing?
You can give arbitrary names to your tree, but we've actually found that you want to put as much information in the path in the name of the thing as you can, so that you can pull out the interesting bits before doing a full query.
Yeah. Classic wire building. Got to have some semantic information in the path.
But I imagine when you are in an environment that's letting you create your own arbitrary nodes, places, and mix and match them, a lot of the names of the nodes will be auto-generated and just its index position in the list, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Mario? Okay, everyone's got... This is a little bit different. I think next speaker here, I think it's Mario. Mario.
Mario is fine. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
I think you kind of hinted at it. I'm wondering, just like with a huge Excel file or a file that you don't know anything about, right? Part of the challenge is identifying and finding what you need, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if there has been placed some thoughts about someone opening an Urbit, already having some apps installed, and what would be the challenges of actually seeing what you want to see or finding it?
There's this idea in Shrubbery, which I can't take any credit for, called a discovery service, which allows you to do queries on a namespace and say, okay, return to me all of the nodes, at this person's Urbit that they allow me to see, which, take in a chat message. And through that interface, you could find out, okay, where should I send a DM to? Or, return to me every node inside of my own personal Urbit that has a state that is shaped like an image, and that will return to you every node that is an image that's on your Urbit. So you can have this arbitrary querying interface where you can search based on either the type of data that's there or the shape of poke that it takes. And through that, you can discover parts of the Scry namespace that take commands or have specific kinds of data.
Yeah, this is a great idea. This is an idea that's been bumping around for a long time, which is just discovery over decentralized data is just a very difficult problem to begin with. But I like this idea. I'd never heard this idea of doing it based on the function as well. That's really interesting. Really
good. It turns out if you just turn everything into the shape of a tree, then
all your problems
you can run simple search algorithms on everything. Yeah, turn everything into a tree.
So I have another user submitted question here that was basically talking about essentially financialization in this whole Shrubbery scheme. Like, what would be opportunities for businesses for providing and capturing value? And I think this is kind of a gesture in the right direction, if I understand correctly, which is that you can selectively expose parts of your namespace to the network. Is that correct?
Yeah. Obviously not everybody wants to make all of their data public. So yeah, you can lock some of it to just yourself and access control it.
Do you have any other ideas about that? Like about how people could maybe use this to run businesses and sort of like things of that nature?
Yeah, one business dynamic that we've been trying to keep in mind when designing this is if you have some big player in an app market who has a really good product, you don't want to pit that entity in competition necessarily against every other app developer in the space. So what we really want to unlock is the ability to, I mean, it's kind of cliche at this point to even say, but like to compose applications and let like the one-man developer make a cool interface that can be embedded into a group chat that's made by a business or something. And so, because shrubs are much more nestable than Gall agents are, you can like put shrubs inside of other shrubs and you can define which shrubs are allowed to go in which shrubs. You have these really nice interfaces for saying, like, yeah, anybody can make an app and embed that app inside of my app. And, that kind of eases some of the competitive dynamics where, people end up trying to silo in the community and make their own chat app kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or hopefully it does. I mean, I'm not going to speak for the future.
Knows? Well, it seems like there's like this. We kind of tend to think, at least in the mobile context, that the app is the monetizable unit, But it seems like in this, there's all kinds of different monetizable units potentially, right? Because you could be providing data at a certain place in your namespace that is valuable that you can charge people to access. Just think about everything in Google Finance, for example. I could do that in my namespace. You could also, like you were saying, provide, I don't know what your terminology, but essentially UI elements, like not even apps, right? Just sub app level UI elements that could potentially be for sale, and then composing those together into other things. And all those things can be, maybe there can be a market for all of them, right? If I understand correctly.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a big demand for just mirroring Earth side services into the Scry namespace so that you can get the weather just by sending a poke to somebody's, weather shrub, and it'll return the weather for you. And maintaining the bridge between Earth and Mars, I think, is always going to approximate something that becomes a business if it's going to be around for a while.
Yeah, oracles just oracles in the broadest sense of the term, right? Is I think makes a lot of, and in the shrub context, you can kind of see how that would just be essentially a shrub on someone's star, right? And just my star, Marler / weather can just be, right, like a list of all the weather data or something like that.
Right. And one more thing to note on like monetization stuff, I think it's still kind of unfinalized, so don't quote me on any of this. But I think the idea is that every node in the shrub system will have its own set of keys. And you'll be able to do some pretty fancy access control stuff where, because you have crypto all the way down your tree, you can gate stuff pretty granularly, which will have business implications.
Interesting. That's really cool. So that access control wouldn't be enforced strictly at the level of the Urbit, but basically on chain somehow.
Or it's like a PKI that is attested by your Urbit.
Oh, interesting.
For your namespace. But don't quote me on any of that. I don't know.
No, that's more of
crypto stuff's way over my brain.
No, there's a couple of other people we can get on the show that I think can dive more into that. Because I've heard rumors of this as well, but I think it's I don't really quite understand it. But
the idea is sort of like a multi-tenanting sort of idea.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's I don't know. If there's an idea that sounds cool, it's found in Shrubbery somewhere. Just know.
That's the best pitch.
Whenever I talk to Liam, he's just like, he says yes to every idea. It's amazing. We're like, is this possible? He's like, oh yeah. It's trivial.
Who is Liam?
#dibtux. He's the one who designed.
I'm kidding.
All right. So don't worry. There will be several other episodes that deal with Shrubbery, which needs to be approached, I think, about 15 different times before people get it. But at the end of the day, it's going to be so obvious in hindsight that I think it'll be clear.
Yeah, your kids will understand it by the time they're 4 or 5 years old.
Well, I always tell people it's just like actually how I thought Urbit worked so it's actually not like a new thing. It's kind of like how this all should have worked from day one. If you look at the sort of like Curtis demo from way back in the day, I think it implied more of a shrub type thinking than what we have now. So Return to Future Past Exactly. All right. Well, Migrev, it's been a real pleasure. It's been great talking to you. Yeah, we'll get some of that behind the scenes content. Roslet can ask you all the questions she has.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for joining us. Yeah, like I said, I think we're going to do a couple more with people that are Shrubbery adjacent, so we can keep kind of delving into this and talking about it. A lot of stuff to discuss here. Hopefully, we'll have more demos and visuals and stuff coming out soon. So keep an eye out for that. Otherwise, I will see you next time.
Thanks for having me.